que tem uma experiência muito grande nesse assunto, não apenas no Brasil, mas em todo o mundo. Ele olha isso internacionalmente. Bom, aqui a nossa introdução é rapidamente para falar sobre a SSPI do Brasil. Mais uma vez agradecendo a presença de todos aí que entraram agora. Hoje no Brasil nós temos uma diretoria, né, onde eu sou presidente, nós temos a Patrícia Schmidt como vice-presidente, Guilherme Cavalcante, secretário, Alexandre Gonçalves, tesoureiro. E um conselho bastante ativo, composto pelo nosso presidente de honra, Mauro Weinberg, né? Além dele, o Guilherme Saraiva, o Edio Gomes e o Edson Meira. Tá? Todos bastante ativos e todos participaram aí nesse evento, para que esse evento de hoje pudesse acontecer. Próximo. Quem está me gerenciando o slide? Edio.
Espera aí, deu problema aqui. Ah, foi.
Não, passou um a mais. Não, antes.
É esse.
Isso. Então, esse ano, tá, nós tivemos, por causa do coronavírus, infelizmente nós não pudemos realizar os eventos presenciais que a gente historicamente tem. Então, esse ano nós optamos por fazer 2 eventos. Tá? No primeiro, agora, no final do primeiro semestre, no segundo, nosso primeiro webinar, que é esse evento que vocês estão participando. E, em novembro, nós teremos um evento mais amplo, maior, que também vai ser online, tá? Em data a ser definida. Tá? E esse evento de novembro vai ser um evento em que a gente vai ser já um evento cobrado, a princípio, né, com preço a ser definido, mas aquele precinho camarada que vocês estão acostumados aí. Tá? Só para simbólico mesmo, para que possa viabilizar o evento. E esse evento de novembro, então, vai ser um evento de talvez com maior duração, provavelmente mais de um dia, em que a gente vai abrir para várias empresas aí fazerem uma atualização, como sempre fazem, da tecnologia e do mercado de satélites no Brasil. Bom, esse evento de hoje, tá, ele vai ser gravado pela nossa parceira, Priority Conteúdos, que tem sido uma grande parceira aí da SSPI nos últimos anos, e disponibilizado no aplicativo da Priority Conteúdos, tá, que está disponível na Apple Store e Google Play. Quem participa da Tech Friday, toda sexta-feira, lá com o Cristóvão e com o Edio, já deve ter o aplicativo. Se você ainda não tem, baixa o aplicativo, que além dos conteúdos técnicos de satélite, tem vários outros conteúdos interessantes que a Priority transmite. Bom, falando um pouquinho sobre o patrocínio. Tá? Para esse evento aqui não tivemos patrocínio, tá? Nós fizemos o evento aberto totalmente. Mas em 2020, para quem costuma aí ser patrocinador, e peço que vocês também divulguem isso nas suas empresas, tá? A gente vai ter uma taxa reduzida de patrocínio, né? As nossas taxas de patrocínio variavam de R$5.000, R$6.000 até 10, 12, eu acho, se não me engano. Esse ano nós fizemos uma cota única de R$2.000, tá? Em que a gente vai ter o patrocínio tanto no website, né, quanto nos eventos que a gente vai fazer. Tá? Então, a ideia o evento de novembro já ter não só espaço para divulgação do patrocinador, mas também palestras, né? Convidar para realizar palestras no nosso evento de novembro, que, se Deus quiser, vai ser muito bem sucedido. Está me colocando aqui, né? O nosso website, tá? SSPI.com.br, já aceita pagamento de patrocínio online. Tá? Se alguém tiver alguma dúvida, por favor, entre em contato conosco por esse e-mail, contato@SSPI, e a gente vai ter um prazer aí de falar. De qualquer maneira, nós estaremos também entrando proativamente em contato com as empresas com a nossa proposta de patrocínio. Bom, e só para concluir, não deixem de seguir a SSPI Brasil nas redes sociais, tá? Nós estamos, esse ano nós estamos, vamos dizer, revitalizando nossas redes sociais. Temos já uma pessoa dedicada a gerenciá-las, então vocês vão sentir uma diferença muito grande. Sigam a SSPI Brasil no Facebook, no LinkedIn e também no Instagram. Tá? E nessas redes sociais nós estaremos divulgando tudo isso, todas as novidades, colocando posts também de assuntos de interesse da comunidade satélite, tá? E também com uma forma também de interagir com vocês todos, né? De comunicação, de mantermos em contato para esclarecimento de dúvidas, etc. Acho que a gente não vai ser um marco, né? Uma quebra aí de paradigma para a gente passar agora a frequentar também as redes sociais de forma bastante ativa. Isso vai estreitar muito a relação da comunidade satélite. A gente quer que a SSPI no Brasil seja o hub para que a comunidade satélite se encontre nas redes sociais e discuta e possa ser realmente muito proveitoso para todos. Ok? Com isso eu termino a minha introdução. Agradeço a todos. Passar para o Edio.
Oi. Bom, gostaria de agradecer aí a presença de todo mundo e vou passar para o inglês, que o nosso convidado é o Hazem Moakkit. Ele é vice-presidente de estratégia de Spectrum da Intelsat e a língua que ele fala, aqui normalmente ele não fala português ainda, né? Mas fala o inglês, e eu vou passar então para o inglês e vou fazer a apresentação introdutória do tema, né? Que ele vai falar da Banda C, e eu vou falar rapidamente, não é, para contextualizar a respeito dessa questão da Banda C e do 5G, tá? Então deixa eu localizar aqui, achei. Agora vamos ver aqui no Zoom, compartilhar. Primeira vez que a gente está fazendo um webinar, galera, dá um desconto aí para a gente, hein? Compartilhar a tela. Ok. 5G, they say it's the network of the networks. Former president would say, nunca na história desse país ou desse universo se viu uma rede tão boa. They say that it's not just an evolution of the networks, but it's a disruption. Of course, the people from the mobile sector, they always say that, but this time we really believe that it's going to be different. It's not going to be just more speed or more throughput. There is a lot of things that the 5G should be bringing to the users. But that doesn't mean that the satellites cannot help with the 5G solutions. You can see that there are many solutions that the 5G is able to accomplish that can be and will be used also using satellites, because satellite is an infrastructure. Satellite is not a solution per se. Satellite complements networks. So 5G will always rely on satellites to get to remote places, okay? And I'm sure you see more of that here in the presentation that our speaker will make in a few minutes, okay? This is the problem that we have with 5G here in Brazil, okay? If you see here, they were saying that IMT, which is the mobile, was going to go up to 3,600, which causes a problem in the adjacent area. But now Anatel proposed it to go up to 3,700. And as you will see in Hazem presentation, in the US, it goes up to 3,800. So the C-band now have to worry not only about adjacent interference, but in-band interference. So this is my very brief introduction. And now I'm gonna give the words to Hazem, and so he can share his presentation and talk to us about the C-band issues here in Brazil.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time that you guys have given me. Without further ado, I would like to start my presentation. So if you give me a minute. So going here.
Okay, well, while Hazem is sharing his presentation, I'd like to say that Hazem is with Intelsat as VP of Spectrum Strategy, and it's his second stint with Intelsat. He worked at Intelsat, then he went to IASat, worked there for a little bit. I believe he probably built the regulatory sector there, and then he came back to Intelsat. So he's a veteran of the regulatory scenario in satellite communications. Thank you, Hazem.
Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate it. So, so again, thanks for everybody for joining, and I prepared a few slides to share with you about our views about C-band. Probably for some of the slides, I'm just going to go very quickly, and some slides, and we can talk about a bit more. I guess everybody can see the screen now, right? All good? All right.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So this is the agenda of the meeting. So I'm going to talk about three main topics. First, to give you a global update about C-band, particularly after WRC 19. Then we're going to talk a bit of the economic realities of 5G. And then the third, we'll talk about some of the technical aspects, particularly after the experience we've had in the U.S. process, over 2 years of an FCC proceeding. So let's start. Okay. So first of all, to start off a little bit, perhaps maybe even some of the basics for a lot of you, but nonetheless. So the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, is a United Nations agency. It's a specialized agency that focuses on informations and communication technologies and the allocation of RF spectrum around the world. And there's 193 member countries, and the world is divided into 3 regions according to the ITU: Region 1, 2, and 3. And we are in the Americas. We are in Region 2. And the World Radio Conference happens every 4 years, and that's when countries go in and to try to decide on the allocation of spectrum. So needless to say, with the explosion of wireless devices and the state of technology, C-band is at the crosshairs of the ITU and many countries. So what happened in WRC 19? C-band was not formally on the agenda of WRC 19, but it was studied as a future agenda item. So at the last WRC meeting, 2 future agenda items were decided for C-band. Agenda item 1.3 for Region 1, which discusses elevating the status of mobile from secondary to primary. And then for Region 2, which is relevant to us, was agenda item 1.2, which discusses specifically identifying 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz for IMT. And IMT is the nomenclature for mobile, right? So for Region 2, we have agenda item 1.2. For Region 3, there was no discussion of C-band. There's no future agenda items for C-band. So this kind of gives you a graphic representation of what the status is. So you can see the big green line is what the original FSS allocations are. So you can see here the status of every region. And we can talk about this a bit more. You can see that in Region 1, they're studying the elevating mobile to primary. Region 2, they just want to do the identification of IMT. This kind of gives you here a for a Region 2 update on what is really happening, the countries with hotspots for C-band. So obviously the U.S. There's the U.S. proceeding, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. whereby 3.7 to 4.0 gigahertz was allocated to mobile. We have Brazil, which you're all familiar with. Canada, we are expecting a consultation to come out later this summer. It is usually expected that Canada follows the US pretty closely. In Colombia, there's a consultation, but that stops at 3.7 gigahertz. Peru surprised us with a decision to go all the way to 3.8 without prior, advance notice. In Chile, they moved around a little bit. At first they said they wanted to go to 3.8, but as far as I know, right now they have stopped at 3.65 with 3.7 gigahertz. To give you a global situation of C-band, so that you sort of see how C-band is used around the world, and this in many ways dictates their positions that they're taking on C-band. So if you start with the right, with Asia, you can see that you have countries like India, China, and Indonesia, massive countries with a lot of people, continue to rely on C-band for B2B and B2C. And that's why you'll see that in WRC 19, they did not open up C-band at all for region 3. You have Russia has its own government programs and they have their own use of C-band. They're also big defenders of C-band. Japan and Korea, obviously they are very pro-mobile, and Japan is probably the only country that has allocated all the way to 4.1 gigahertz for mobile. Australia is also a country with heavy emphasis on mobile. Europe and the Middle East, this is a region where they do use C-band, but it's very much primarily for B2B, for teleports, and that's why again that they are moving toward mobile. I mean, Europe obviously they have already decided to go all the way to 3.8. In Africa, it's a mixed bag, but by and large they are still very much reliant on C-band. And then we discussed region 2. So this sort of gives you this global high-level view of how C-band is used around the world. So an update on the U.S. process on C-band. So a decision was made basically by the FCC early in around March of this year, where they decided that they want to allocate 3.7 to 4 gigahertz to mobile. Out of these 300 megahertz, only 280 megahertz will be available to the mobile. 20 megahertz will be reserved as the guard band between mobile and FSS. So you can see here that, you know, a country the size of the US with over 300 million people, and with right now 4 major operators, soon to be 3, they have figured that 280 megahertz was enough. So this kind of gives you an indication about what's a good balance. So the FCC expects the auction to happen later on this year. The cost of clearing will be reimbursed and funded from auction proceeds. Additionally, the satellite operators are going to receive incentive payments funded by the auction proceeds so that they clear the spectrum more quickly. So essentially, if satellite operators do not choose to participate, they have until 2025 to clear. But if they want to receive the payments, they have to clear the 280 megahertz by 2023. Also, the technical rules covered several areas, and they covered TT&C protection, TT&C Earth Station protection. They covered the protection of registered Earth stations. And I emphasize the point registered because they're not protecting everybody. They only protected the registered Earth stations. They confirmed that the need for a guard band, and they specified the 20 megahertz guard band. And they also acknowledged the out of band emission problem that may be caused by 5G base stations. Okay, so moving on to the next section about the 5G and the economics of 5G. So the statement that we often hear from the mobile operators, if you read the GSMA publications or if you read the GSA publications, you'll always see, oh, every mobile operator needs 80 to 100 megahertz of spectrum so that you achieve the true potential of 5G. Okay, so this is a statement that you hear over and over and over, right? But studies show really different things. You know, the studies show that the economics, the benefits of 5G is realized in the first 40 megahertz that an MNO uses. Meaning if an MNO deploys 5G in C-band, if they get 40 megahertz and they start deploying with 40 megahertz, they achieve the economics, the benefits of it. And then after that, it's an incremental gain. Obviously, more spectrum, there's no doubt, more spectrum is better, but you do achieve your objectives when you have a 40 megahertz channel, right? And then here on the right, this is a study that Ofcom did to show what you can achieve with 40 megahertz. And let me just get rid of this. Okay. So you can see that on the curves, different carrier sizes, and the dotted lines show the kind of service that you can achieve, and clearly shows that there's no evidence that more than 40 megahertz is absolutely necessary to conduct 5G. Okay. So in practice, I mean, and this is not just theoretical, this is proven in real world. I mean, here there's a list of MNOs that have actually deployed 5G services with 40 megahertz. So EE in the UK launched their service in 6 cities with 40 megahertz. Vodafone launched 5G in 41 locations with 50 megahertz. Telstra in Australia, they launched with 60 megahertz of C-band. So on and on. I mean, there are many cases where, you know, it shows that it's possible to deploy effective 5G in C-band with 40 megahertz. So this talk about you need to have 100 megahertz is simply not founded. Okay, so the risks here is like, why, you know, you think why do the MNOs always ask for more spectrum? I think in reality, all what they're trying to do is that they are trying to increase the supply of spectrum so that they can reduce its price, you know, so they can get more of it at a lower price. So really it comes to an issue of balancing supply and demand, because if you dump too much spectrum in the hands of MNOs, you're going to suppress the value of the spectrum. And then from a regulator standpoint, you're going to make less money on auctions. Meanwhile, by taking spectrum away from FSS, you take spectrum away from an existing service that is producing value to the economy and putting it into a speculative side where, you know, they're asking for more spectrum than they need. So this is about the need to supply to balance the supply and demand. So here, I mean, this shows you the spectrum pricing per megahertz per pop in Europe. And the interesting thing that I just out of this slide is that in certain countries that have, like Austria, if you look at the last bullet, they have auctioned 400 megahertz of C-band. Some of it remained unsold because they put too much spectrum on the market, right? And this is certainly not efficient use of spectrum. You release spectrum and nobody shows up to buy it, that's a problem, right? So the issue of balancing supply and demand is really, really important. Interesting thing about the penetration of 4G and 5G in Latin America, right? And this, by the way, this comes from the GSMA report, the 2019 GSMA report. You can see that 4G is still at about 40% penetration right now. In fact, we are here in 2021. You are between 30 and 40% penetration in South America, right? So we're still very far from achieving optimal penetration for 4G. So the talk about 5G and wanting to get all the spectrum right now does not make any economic sense, right? So why are we taking spectrum away from current users who are producing value and putting it in the hands of people who still are years away from being able to fully utilize what they have right now? So there's really no justification for more spectrum in C-band. I mean, if we open up 3.4 to 3.6 or 3.3 to 3.6, that's certainly more than enough for the foreseeable future for MNOs to roll out their services. So, any questions so far? Okay. All right. So the question is that also, do MNOs have alternatives to C-band right now? And the answer is obviously yes, they do. First, they can refarm their 2G and 3G spectrum, because as they migrate to 4G and some of them go to 5G, they are turning off their 2G and 3G networks. And this means that they should be able to recycle the spectrum and use it for 5G. So before they go on to acquiring more spectrum, they can work on refarming their own spectrum. The other issue that is also overlooked is sharing spectrum among MNOs. And as it's becoming more evident that the densification required for 5G networks, the number of towers that you have to deploy, it becomes very costly, a very, very intensive cost for MNOs to deploy everybody on their own in 5G. So, and then in the other point that you notice is that when they design a network, they design it perhaps for peak hours, so which means that the networks often end up being underutilized most of the time. So by sharing spectrum, then they can achieve higher efficiency, and this has already been done in some places. You know, this is not a novel idea. In some countries, it has been done, and it's working successfully. Thirdly, they can use millimeter wave in high density areas. I mean, if you're talking about a stadium, or if you're talking about downtown in the middle of the city, it's possible to use millimeter wave and achieve much better throughput in these short ranges. So there are other ways that they can meet their requirement. So this I'm not going to spend too much time on. So with Brazil, there's essentially three consultations that are somehow linked to C-band, 2 of them directly linked to C-band. And I think what's important here is that we notice that there is a realization that there are certain principles to make 5G coexist with FSS side by side, which is the need for guard band, the need for filters, the need to look at out-of-band emissions. But so far, what we have seen in the consultations, it was quite lacking on the parameters of 5G. What is it that we have to live with? What is the power level? You know, what is out-of-band emission? So a lot of things remain open. But I think the satellite industry did a pretty good job in presenting their views about this. And we see that Anatel is starting to think again about it. So then I'm moving on to the last section to talk about the technical considerations. So as you know, there has been numerous cases, numerous studies done at the ITU, and this dates back to 2007 and a long time ago, because C-band has been under attack for many years now. But there are documented studies and agreed studies that basically that you can't coexist co-frequency, that 5G and FSS cannot coexist together in the same geography in a co-frequency. And the reasons are simple. You know, the nature of the signals are quite different. The satellite signal is very weak. 5G is very loud. They can't coexist. And even if you look at the mobile industry's own publications, if you look at, I was just reading the GSA report yesterday, and they clearly say our preference is to clear FSS out of the spectrum, because it'll create so many constraints on us that we'd rather move them out. So this talk of sharing is really is not really practical, you know. And so we'll move on to the next slide. So our work on the FCC proceeding, you know, and our testing that we've done basically confirms that. So satellite signals are very weak because they come from 36,000 kilometers away. The 5G signals are much more powerful. I mean, you have a transmitter right, you know, within a few hundred meters compared to a transmitter that's 36,000 kilometers away. So the gap or the difference in levels is humongous. So the interference mechanisms that are at work here are two mechanisms. First, you have the LMB saturation, and then the second is the out-of-band emissions of the 5G signals. And we have done testing on both of these, and then the perhaps it was less obvious, but it's indeed the out-of-band emissions have the capability to knock down a satellite signal. So essentially, to manage interference from 5G to FSS receivers, you need to have every air station to be fitted with a bandpass filter. You need to institute a guard band, and you need to adopt out-of-band emissions that protect those air stations. One point I forgot to mention here is that the size of the guard band is going to vary. So in the US, we selected a 20 megahertz guard band, which was very optimized, but that was because of a very specific reason. The reason is that the earth stations have known locations. So the base stations, the 5G base stations, know where the earth stations are, so they know how to direct their power toward these earth stations. In other regions, like Hong Kong, for example, in China, they came up with a guard band of 100 megahertz. And the reason is that they have a lot of B2C earth stations that they don't know where they are, and they don't intend to turn them off. So the only way to make 5G coexist next to FSS in this environment was to put a 100 megahertz guard band. So the size of the guard band there's no one magic number that says this is at 20 megahertz or 35. It's all going to depend on what is it that you're trying to achieve. So back again to the technical rules that the FCC adopted, and mind you, we don't necessarily agree. We agree with the principles, but we don't agree with some of the numbers that the FCC adopted. For example, on the category of protecting incumbent FSS earth stations, they figured that an acceptable I over N for the protection of the earth station is -6. We have advocated for -10 dB I over N, but then they opted for -6. And they also adopted a PFD level to be met at the earth stations that essentially assumes, again, without going through the math behind it, but the PFD level to achieve the -6 I over N, it assumes that the look angle or the elevation angle of the earth station is 20 degrees. So that means that if you have an earth station with an elevation angle less than 20, it's not protected by the envelope defined by the FCC. Moving on to the protection of the TT&C, again, they use the -6 dB I over N. The levels that, again, without going into details, they specified certain filters that we are right now in the midst of discussion with the FCC because we think that their specifications are infeasible. They can't be implemented. In terms of base station power levels, as you would expect, they were very generous to the 5G people. So they allow them to do 62 dBm per megahertz for non-rural areas and up to 65 dBm in rural areas. So that's pretty high. In terms of the out-of-band emission, again, they were quite generous at -13 dBm per megahertz. So the situation that was created for us in the US is quite constraining. So I'm putting these numbers here not because I'm advocating them. I'm not saying that they're good numbers, but this is what was proposed in the US. And we're going to have to find a way to live with it. But at least the principles are there, that they agree that there should be protection of earth stations, protection of TT&C, and on setting power limits on base stations. So the filter performance, another thing that the FCC did in the order was to specify what the bandpass filter should do, what's the performance of that bandpass filter should be like, right? And you can see that the suppression from 3.7 to, let's see, in this case, to 3.9 gigahertz, they expect the filter to have a 70 dB suppression, which is, by the way, the bandpass filters that are available in the market right now do not meet that number. But in addition to that, Intelsat has been able to actually even further tune the filter and improve it to achieve better performance than what the FCC provided. But you can see that a filter with a very sharp roll-off and very high suppression is really critical to being able to survive next to a 5G transmitter. So just to wrap up at the end, so the final thought is that yes, 5G is very promising, it's very important, but we have to reality that that in Latin America, many countries, and Brazil perhaps, is that 4G still has not been fully rolled out. So we need to be a bit realistic. The other component is that C-band is still a very significant component in the telecommunication infrastructure. So it does a great service to Brazil and South America. So it should not be dismissed. And any repurposing of C-band should be done in a manner that does not disrupt these valuable services in every country. In fact, before I move on to this, the one thought that also occurred to me is that in the time of COVID right now, right, and with the economic situation where spending is being cut on many, many companies it's cutting spending, and there's prioritization of where the money goes. In my personal opinion, it's not wise for regulators to rush reallocation of spectrum right now at this moment, because I highly doubt that MNOs are going to spend a lot of money on building infrastructure at these precarious times. I think they're going to try to maximize their investment before they go on and roll out new services. And so that's why I think taking spectrum away from a segment that is already producing and providing value and putting it in the hands of somebody who's still yet to build and yet to invest would not be the wisest decision. So my last point is a call to action for everybody, which is that how do we protect C-band together? And I think what became evident in the US and even in many other proceedings is that counting your antennas and knowing where they are and registering their antennas, either formally or informally, is really, really important. So if you are a service provider and you rely on C-band, keep a spreadsheet of your antennas, know where they are, know how many there are, right? Because this is all important when the time comes, if there is any transition or any changes to the spectrum allocations. Stay involved. If you see something, or if you see something out there, if you hear anything about the regulators making decisions, then say it, share it with others so that we can all address it. And the third point is that regulators often get tired of hearing from satellite operators. I think it's a lot more powerful when they hear it from users of the spectrum. And lastly, is basically talk to us, let us know. If you have any questions, we will be happy to help you and support you. So, and this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions or do whatever the director tells me.
Thank you, Hazem. This was very interesting indeed. And we do have a couple of questions that came in. One came in right about in the middle of your presentation, and it is a question about what do you think is the optimum penetration for 4G in LATAM?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not going to give you an opinion because I'm not a 5G expert, but when you look at the penetration and realize that they're still at 30 to 40% penetration, I mean, I would think that they need to be at least in the 60 or 70% penetration to say that they have achieved their goal, But it seems that 4G has not fully penetrated South America in every region.
Okay.
And that's based on, I mean, you can look at it. This is based on GSMA data, right here, right? So these red columns, they represent the 4G penetration, and the dark ones are the 5G penetration. So you can see right now we're in 2021. It's between 30 and 40% penetration, and it's not going to hit 40%. It's not going to even hit 50% in 2025. You see, So so that's something to think about, you know.
Thank you very much. Also, one more question we received is if you can evaluate the possibility considered by Anatel to assign the 3700 to 3800 range to 5G indoor and small cells. Is it possible to coexist, and what do you think can be the impacts?
So for me, I would like to go back to the question of the amount of spectrum. So Brazil is one of those countries that have the 3.3. They can go down as low as 3.3 gigahertz. So the point is that if Anatel releases 3.3 to 3.6, right, that's 300 megahertz, right? Compare that to what the FCC is doing. That's a little bit more than what the FCC is doing. Let's say they even go to 3.7, right? That's 400 megahertz. So to me, the question of why do you really need to go above 3.7 is really a very curious one, because compared to even what happens in Europe, Germany, for example, they only auction 300 megahertz, right? UK is, I believe, they stopped at 3.7. I mean, obviously they can auction some more, but they're not going. Nobody's going beyond 400 megahertz under any stretch of the imagination, right?
Yeah.
So to me, this question of why do you even consider going above 3.7 is quite mind-boggling, because putting that much spectrum without a good business case behind it, you're basically asking for inefficiencies, and you're asking for you're not giving the spectrum to its best and highest use. So, but in terms of technically, is it feasible? The problem is that how do you know? How do you make sure that people, buy it for indoors and not smack it outside of their window, so that they can, cover their from house to house, or in their backyard, or in the neighborhood? I mean, there's no way of guaranteeing that these deployments are going to stay indoors. In theory, it may be possible, but not in practice, I would think.
Got it. We just received one more, which is the FCC has assigned 20 megahertz as a guard band between 5G and the satellite applications. Do you think that bandwidth will be sufficient for our country here in Brazil?
In all honesty, I don't think so. Let me go back to the original premise on how this 20 megahertz came about. The number of Earth stations in the US that are registered, because remember, the first premise is that they're only protecting registered Earth stations with known locations, right? And there's about, in the country the size of the US, there's only about 15,000 or 16,000 Earth stations, right? These are registered Earth stations. Everybody who's not registered is not going to be protected. So the technical rules that were adopted were based on the fact that 5G transmissions or 5G base stations have to meet a PFD level at the Earth stations, at the locations of these victim Earth stations, which means that the base station has to know where the Earth station is, so that when it uses beamforming, it makes a point of nulling or avoiding the direction of the Earth station. So under these conditions, right, and under saying that the elevation has to be above 20 degrees, and under reducing the I/N from the usual minus 12.2 dB that we ask for in the ITU to minus 6, right? We came up with the 20 megahertz. We were able to optimize the guard down to 20 megahertz.
Got it.
Now, if you have a situation where the Earth stations are not known, you want to go to a lower elevation, or you're targeting a better I/N, then that 20 megahertz is not going to be sufficient. The other point is that you really need to be able to build a really good filter. The off-the-shelf filters that are not consistent or do not have good suppression are not going to cut it. So, you look at it at places like China, they went for 100 megahertz. I think in Singapore they did 50 megahertz. So every region is doing it depending on what is it that you're trying to protect. So, but knowing that in Brazil you rely on C-band a lot for B2C, then I would think 20 megahertz may be cutting it a bit too close. It may not work for a lot of people.
Got it. Well, thank you for answering those questions. I do not receive any new ones from the audience, but I know our co-host Edio has a couple of questions for you. So let's bring him on now, give him the word.
Sure, sure.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks, Hazem, for a very good presentation about the C-band issue. As you probably are aware of, Anatel has been conducting many testing, and they claim to have some LNBFs that can filter out of-band emissions from the mobile in 3300 to 3600. Do you believe these will be cheap devices to be able to filter that out?
So I think the filters, you know, like the filters that I showed in that those waveguide filters. And by the way, I did read the technical work that Anatel issued last year. There was, I understand there's a new one that came out this year, but the technical study that they released last year, they talk about different kind of LNBs. There's the professional LNBs, you know, and then there's the LNBs that are, you know, that have two polarizations built in them, and they stagger frequency. So there are different varieties of LNBs. Now, whether you want to create an LNB with the filter built into the waveguide, I mean, you can do that. Or whether you want to retrofit the existing LNB with a waveguide filter in the front of it, that's also possible. Now these filters that we have optimized, I think the price point is anywhere from 300, maybe 250 to 400, depending where you get them. But so and I don't think that this figure is going to work very well for B2C because it's quite expensive. So I have my doubts about being able to have to mass produce an LNB that can produce 70 dB rejection for a B2C application.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think everything is possible at the end if they put their mind to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the other question is related to that. As you know, we have this B2C that we call here TVROs, and they are in some points they are the only way of communication. So many people even send messages through it. In Brazil, it has been a matter of actually you could do teleeducation, telemedicine through these TVROs if you want to. But for some reason, of course, people from mobile, they say that the C-band is not a coverage. What they say, it's not a coverage frequency. But for some reason, they are reluctant to put that in writing. So many times in many meetings with Anatel, I mentioned to them, okay, well, if you just want to use it in big cities, just let's put it in writing as a resolution from Anatel that cities with less than X thousand people will not have 5G on these frequencies. So this is not actually it's not actually a question. It's more like a talk to. What are your views on that?
I mean, you're right. They, if you, in fact, I was reading some of the GSMA reports last night, and then they do say C-band provides an ideal mix of coverage and capacity. So it's not super it doesn't have super coverage capability, but it doesn't also have super capacity. It's right in between. So, but in the course of our work, we've done analysis around Earth stations to see the size of the protection zone and how it would work. I mean, in some cases, you could have 70 or 80 kilometer range to protect an Earth station. Obviously, it depends on the terrain and what's around the Earth station. But we have seen some cases where, in order to protect an Earth station, you need to be 70 or 100 kilometers away, or 120, depending on the terrain. So if you start to create this situation and you say, okay, you can do 5G, but you need to protect all these earth stations. You're going to end up with a Swiss cheese situation because the protection zone around every earth station is so massive, right? And I think I personally think that the argument against the mobile people is the economic argument, because if you look at creating a balance between the number of MNOs and the amount of spectrum and the investment that's they're going to have to put in order to utilize the spectrum, you're going to figure out that there is a balance, because if you put too much spectrum, then you are leading for inefficiency. It's kind of like you sometimes you work with your kids. If you give them too much, they start spending money without thinking. You need to give them enough to spend, but you give too much money, then you're asking for inefficiencies and abuse of the asset, right? So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Any other questions from anybody?
Yes, we do. We have two more that they just came in. First one is, can we comment on the results of 5G tests done over C-band? Is it satisfactory so far?
Do you mean as coexistence, interference, or?
I suppose it's about,
yes.
Is it delivering the benefit that is expected with the
coexistence? Yes, I understand the question is if it's satisfactory for coexistence.
Yeah. If it's about coexistence, then yeah, if you take all the necessary steps, then you can make it work. But like I said, there's an issue. You must recognize, regulators must recognize that you need a guard band. As any engineer would tell you, you put a filter. Filter works with it needs bandwidth to work with. So you can't put a filter and expect it to work in zero hertz. And you can also build you can't build an ideal filter with a stone, like a brick filter that drops. I mean, you need X number of megahertz for it to work, while at the same time you're not sacrificing group delay and the distortion and the size of the filter, because the nicer the filter, the bigger it becomes and the more expensive it gets. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration.
Right. It's like I say, as in sometimes a rubber glove will protect you from electricity, but don't use a rubber glove and grab a 20 kilowatt power line.
Exactly.
Right. Because I mean, there is a limit. So the filter is a filter, but depending on the difference in level and the difference in levels between a 5G tower and the signal coming into a feed of a C-band dish is about 120 dB at least 120 dBs.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
I mean, what kind of filter can you make to prevent from that?
Exactly.
Without having a guard band and distancing and things like that. It's almost like COVID, right? You have to have frequency distancing instead of social distancing.
Yeah. Agreed.
Anyway, okay. There's another one, Alexandre.
Yes, we do. We have one more, which is about the fact that one of the top 3 Brazilian MNOs just announced plans to use the spectrum from 4G to launch 5G. So what do we think about that? Is it the right way to reduce the need for C-band spectrum? Yeah,
I mean, if they're essentially refarming the spectrum. I mean, also, by the way, to that point, some people argue the other way, that they can use C-band and use it for 4G and then transition to 5G. So spectrum is agnostic, right? It becomes an issue of whether there is equipment and whether there is an ecosystem to support that deployment. But yeah, I mean, hey, why not? In fact, the 2.5 gigahertz is ideal replacement for C-band.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, Edio, I have not received any other questions at this moment.
Okay, well, then I would like to thank Hazem. Hazem, you're more than welcome to, thank you very much. It was the first webinar. I think it worked perfectly. We thank you very much for your very nice presentation. And feel free to stick around. We're gonna have now a little raffle. We're gonna raffle some Echo Dots with Alexa. So
Your name is on the list.
Yep.
Your name is on the list? Yes, yes, his name is on the list, of course. What we're gonna do is we have an online site that does this kind of raffle. So I'm gonna share here my, okay, here, that's the one. I'm gonna share my screen.
Yeah, and let's continue in English, Edu, because we have some people that join from abroad.
Okay.
So they are. Thank you for everyone that joined from out of Brazil to this. It's an honor to receive you all, and so let's please continue in English so they can understand the raffle, and they are participating also, right? So.
Yeah, I believe so. Well, there is one thing that I need to do, that I need to say. One thing, I'm going to say it in English and Portuguese, okay? What we did is we closed the gates at 5:30 p.m. So everybody that was here up to the 5:30 p.m. is on this list. If you joined after that, just for the raffle, I'm sorry. Your name is not on the list. Let me say that in Portuguese. Nós avisamos várias vezes que a gente fecharia as portas às 5:30 da tarde. Então, se você entrou após as 5:30 da tarde, só para o sorteio ou porque esqueceu, infelizmente não dá para a gente discernir, o seu nome não vai estar aqui. Essa lista foi feita com as pessoas que estavam online até as 5:30 da tarde. Tá? Então agora, now I'm sharing. Can you see that?
E se você é estagiário da Spamar também, não vale entrar nesse sorteio. Tá?
Não temos mais estagiários na Spamar por enquanto.
Os caras ganham todas.
Vocês estão vendo a minha tela? O que vocês estão vendo?
Estou vendo a sua tela.
Mas a tela inteira?
Sim.
Tá só para ali no José Edio a lista.
Não vejo.
Aqui, essa é a lista. Vocês estão vendo a lista?
Estamos vendo a lista.
Ok. Então aqui é a lista de todas as pessoas que estavam, não é? Como vocês podem ver, fizemos a compilação.
Você não vai fazer chamada não, né, Edio?
Oi? Não vou fazer
não vai fazer chamada de todo mundo não, né, cara?
Não, só vai ter que falar, só vai ter que responder a uma pergunta, tá? Qual foi o time que bateu todos os recordes do YouTube para um evento esportivo ontem? Só isso. Okay, now as Marcio was asking to do it in English. So this is the raffle. We have all the names here on the list, people that were attending the webinar up to 5:30 p.m. And I'm just gonna press here and it's gonna raffle one name of this list. So I'm gonna do that for 3 times because we have 3 echo dots, but just so to make some tension. Because I could easily just put 3 names there and raffle all 3 of them, but then it would not be fun. Okay?
What about the auditors, Edio?
Oh yes, the auditors. But here we don't have the thing about people having multiple pieces of paper. So, yeah, I have to remind that we are thoroughly audited by pressures and marshals, the pressure of the house, and they are very, very strict. So let's go with the raffle.
O Gilberto disse que não viu o nome dele.
Gilberto?
Viu o nome dele, dá uma baixadinha. Não tá mesmo?
Tem Gabriele.
Aí, Edio,
I can put here, no problem.
Edio, também tem aqui um comentário que deve ter sido no meio da cópia e da cola, né?
O Mauro já me ouviu,
ele entrou no laço, mas não apareceu na lista.
Quem?
O nome é Mauro
Jaimovic.
É outro Mauro.
E o Gilberto também.
Não, o Gilberto
Já foi. Mauro.
Jaimovich.
Janovich.
Jaimo.
Assim?
Não é assim, mas a gente vai entender.
Ok. Alguém mais que nós esquecemos aqui? Anybody else that is missing here? Can we raffle?
Pode pôr uns 10, Edson Meira aí, tá tudo certo.
Ok. Okay, so the first name to get an echo dot is Antônio Ivamar Marques Cunha. Antônio Ivamar Marques Cunha, o que você vai fazer é mandar um e-mail para contato@sspi.com.br com o seu nome, bom, nome completo já está, mas bota o seu nome, endereço com CEP, que nós vamos comprar o Echo Dot e vai chegar na sua casa, ok? Vamos mais um. Realizar novo sorteio. Agora tem que lembrar o nome das pessoas, eu vacilei. Vamos lá. São só 2, né?
Eu estou anotando aqui.
Mauro. Não, tem que botar 2 pessoas aqui, né? Mauro.
Jaimovich.
Janovich.
Oh, you're manipulating the list. You're playing with the...
sorry, Hazem. These are people that noticed that their names were not here.
I see.
So for some reason, I don't know, during the copy and paste, they got lost.
This is like elections. You're playing with the elections.
Okay, I'm going to do a copy here so we can get everybody.
Opa, Polícia Federal. Hein?
Next time. Okay, so I want to raffle one person, and it's Echo Dots. Gonna raffle another... Jaimovich, agora eu já vi aqui o nome. Okay, ready? Let's do it. O senhor achava Jamovich difícil de falar? Felipe Lukoviec.
Não fala o sobrenome dele não, cara.
Felipe, a mesma coisa. Você vai mandar um e-mail para contato@sspi.com.br e vai mandar o seu endereço para a gente poder te levar. Tá? E, uma coisa aqui, estamos recebendo uma mensagem que o Antônio não está presente. Então, o Antônio não vai... Então, nós vamos sortear mais 2. Tá? Sorteamos o Felipe. O Felipe está online?
Sim.
Ok, então o Felipe vai receber, mas o Antônio, como saiu, ele não vai ganhar. Vamos sortear mais 2, então. Agora está todo mundo aqui, vamos dar uma olhada. O Gilberto está.
O Mauro tá.
Mas vou botar o nome certo, que já tá, agora está aqui, porra. Copiar eu consigo.
J-I-M-O-V-I-C-H. Isso. V-I-C-H.
Pronto. Ok, agora está com o nome certinho. Deixa eu copiar de novo todo mundo. Para copiar o nome do...
E tira o nome do
Mauro
Felipe.
Certinho. Vamos... verdade. Vamos tirar o Felipe. E o Antônio também, né?
Sim, verdade.
Ou o Antônio voltou?
Não.
Ok. Então, de novo. Echo Dot. All right. Let's get ready to rumble. It's going to be 3. This is the second one because the first guy was not online. So if you're not online, you don't get it. Okay? That's a strict rule from our auditors. Okay, let's get ready to rumble. Ana Lima.
Marmelada, hein?
Isso é marmelada, cara. Isso, meu Deus do céu.
Só dá Intelsat, né? Por que será, hein?
O Felipe é da Intelsat também? Caramba, gente.
Isso aí é marmelada, então.
Aí vocês reclamando do...
Cadê o auditor?
Ano passado foi tudo
reclamando
espamar, né?
dos estagiários da Spamar, pô.
Vale a pena.
Então vamos ver quem é que eu tenho que tirar aqui.
Márcio Brasil, vai, tá faltando.
Márcio Brasil tem que tirar, né? Felipe já foi.
senão ele vai
Nada disso, nada disso.
Antônio.
Ana Lima tem que tirar.
Vai direto aqui, ó.
Pô, foi nos 3 aí, cara.
Peraí, a Ana tá aí? Já falou, ok?
Tô aqui, tô aqui.
Ah, bom.
Marcação cerrada aí, cara.
Tô aqui.
Parabéns.
Okay, now, members of the directory and the council, are we going to raffle 3 or 4 echo dots?
You can do 4 from the estimate for the budget.
Okay.
Fine.
Says the man of the money.
Patrocinador,
Okay, so
por favor.
O Intelsat agora vai ter que patrocinar, né, Márcio?
so this
Pois é.
is the third one.
Eu vou passar lá no Hotel Flórida para pedir o camarão VG e o chopp, hein? E botar a conta na conta de vocês.
Podia ser sorteado uma quentinha de camarão VG.
Ô, Gilberto, você pode ir lá e pedir que dessa vez o camarão vem com máscara. Okay, let's get ready to rumble. One more name. That's the second to last. What happened today?
Outro
Sarah,
nome fácil.
Is
Outro
Sarah
nome
here?
muito fácil, Edio.
Sarah, are you here?
Edio, fala esse nome aí.
Ah, Sarah Schmeier.
Não, não tá.
Sarah Schmeier. Ela não
Sarah
está.
Sarah is from Intelsat as well.
Is she,
Yes. But she's not here.
I
She's
can
not
take it on
here,
her behalf.
so-
I can take it on her behalf.
No, it's not. It's a rule that we have since 2000, 20 years, that whoever is not present loses.
Yes. So let's go. And so we have 2 more to go. So we have to take Sarah out. Who else? Antônio e Ana.
Já copia a lista, Edio.
Boa ideia. Quem mais que não? Felipe. Eu vou copiar essa agora.
É.
Ficou. Peraí. Ai, meu Deus. Pronto. Ok, let's go. José. Eco.
O nome
Eu
tá
já
aí,
me
Edio?
perdi. Tem quantos agora para sortear?
Foi um para a Ana Lima e um para o Felipe. Tem mais 2.
Tem mais 2.
Boa.
Foi Gabriele Fernandes. Essa é da Spamar. Não é estagiária. Já foi. Já foi.
Ganhei, finalmente.
Ganhou? É a primeira vez, Gabriele?
Primeira vez, acredita?
Tantos anos de SSPI.
Pois é, era a única da Spamar que não tinha ganho até hoje.
Exatamente. Pois é, estava esperando esse momento.
Manda um e-mail depois com o seu endereço para contato@sspi.com.br.
Tá bem.
Então, agora é o último. O último, se a pessoa estiver presente, né? Vamos ver. Ó, a qualidade Richer na sua casa. Cadê a Gabriele? É tua prima, Gilberto? Esse é o último, hein, gente? Tá todo mundo aqui.
Não, Edio, não.
Todo mundo aqui, vamos ver. Ah, só assim. Tá sendo gravado, eu tenho que botar tudo isso, senão os auditores caem de pau na gente.
A internet está horrível, às vezes eu saio, tá, gente?
Ah, tá. Quem é que falou aí? Ah, o Mauro? Mauro tá lá? Tá, né? Tá.
Eu tô e não tô vagabundo aqui, cara. Tá horrível, né?
Então vamos lá, é o último, hein? Vamos lá, rápido, enquanto o Mauro tá online. Se for ele, para ele não perder. Esse agora foi o Carlos Botino. Está online, Carlos Botino? Carlos Botino está presente? Carlos
Sim.
Botino.
Tá conectado. Só tem que soltar o...
Tá conectado.
Fala alguma coisa aí, Botino.
Acho que...
Mas ele está presente.
Conectado, mas não está presente de alma, não, cara.
Não, mas está conectado.
Alma, não de corpo.
Mas está conectado, está conectado.
Olha ele aí. Fala aí, Botino.
Opa! Boa noite, gente. Tudo bem?
Boa noite. Você ganhou, Botino. Manda um e-mail para contato@sspi.com.br com seu endereço completo que a gente vai mandar o EcoDot para sua casa.
Valeu, valeu.
Gente, acabamos o sorteio. Infelizmente, o evento online a gente não tem aquele coquetel com o famoso camarão. But I would like to...
Camarão virtual, Marco.
Camarão virtual.
Sob protesto do Mauro.
Ah, gostei. Bacana, ficou bacana.
Pode mandar entregar aqui, cara. Aí. Não pode tem.
Eu queria
tem
só. Só falar mais uma coisa. Gente, o pessoal aí das empresas, patrocinem a gente, tá? Porque no próximo evento, ó, o seu logo pode estar aqui. Entendeu? A gente pode fazer um fundo e o seu logo vai aparecer. Então, patrocina, porque além de você ter a exposição no website, nas mídias sociais, você também pode ter o logo nos eventos que a gente ainda vai fazer esse ano.
E se depender do Edio, lá no Ninho do Urubu também.
Também. É isso aí. Hazem, thank you so much. Thank you very much for your time, for your presentation again. Everybody that is connecting from outside of Brazil, thank you very much for your presence on this first webinar. And I'm going to get back to our president, Márcio, for the final words. And obrigado a todos pela presença e principalmente ao pessoal aí da diretoria e do conselho da SSPI que trabalhou aí bastante para que o evento acontecesse. Obrigado, gente. Márcio, contigo.
Ok. Não, só para agradecer mais uma vez também a todos. Muito obrigado por estarem presentes aí até agora. E aguardem notícias, curtam nossas redes sociais, que teremos muitas novidades nas redes sociais. Facebook, por enquanto, Facebook, Instagram e LinkedIn. Ok? Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, pessoal.
Isso aí, muito obrigado. Vou encerrar aqui.